Before we begin, here's how to earn continuing professional education credit for attending this session. Gain valuable insights by attending the podcast, then complete the assessment test to download your certificate. To do this, follow these simple steps. Click on the link in your description to access the session. Create a free account and attend the podcast. After the podcast, take the assessment test and download your certificate. It's easy, and it's free. We highly recommend checking out our subscription.
You answered this question between the lines. The question I have is, what are some effective strategies you have seen for a small business recovering from the pandemic? Can you speak on that, please?
So effective strategies is really being honest about the landscape that we're all working within. Having those tough conversations with owners where we're really obligated to say, as much as you think the grass is greener, it's just as dry over there as it is on this side. And so being strategic about knowing and meeting them where they're at. I realize that you're this far away from the idea that you would have hybrid, but you might find a more efficient workforce. And a more efficient workforce is a happy workforce. So my master's is on why did people leave companies? And this was written in 2008, and it's still true to this day. People do not leave companies because of money. They leave because of how they feel about the work, how they feel in relation to that work, and if they're valued. And so it's very important that you have someone that can help an employer, it doesn't matter the industry, recognize that, and that there's missed opportunities if they don't. And you can get on a hamster wheel if you like, but what happens is that the workforce will find its way to what serves them. You and I, at the top of this conversation, talked about what led me to this industry. What led me to this industry, as I shared with you, is finding something that I was better suited for, that I could respond to and have passion and purpose about. And I am no different than the workforce.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to another episode of HR Talk, Unpacking Trends and Talent Innovations. I am Behnam Bakshande, one of the hosts of HR Talk episodes and podcasts. Today's episode's topic is HR compliance and infrastructure, building a strong HR foundation for small businesses. Our guest today is Ms. Selena Thomas, PHR, MYCPE, CEO and founder of 6 Degrees HR Consulting Incorporated, located at Santa Clarita, California. Selena Thomas is a 15-year resident of Santa Clarita, California. She's a busy mother of 3 daughters, CEO and founder of 6 Degrees HR Consulting, host of a podcast on the SCV Signal, and recently featured in the February 2023 edition of San Francisco Business Journal. Ms. Thomas has a master's degree in human resources and is a nationally certified human resource specialist. She works closely with many local companies, employment attorneys, business leaders, and insurance brokers to assure the compliances and infrastructure of the small businesses. She is often called upon as an expert in her industry and lend herself and her expertise to the Workforce Development Center at COC, the Santa Clarita Chamber of Commerce, and the Valley Industry Association chairwoman. She recently served on the board of directors for the Wish Education Foundation, recently was elected as the 2024 chairwoman of the Valley Industry Association, and is an active member of the many community organizations. Selena's focus is to continue to highlight, advocate, support, and celebrate the businesses of SCV and beyond. Her plan is to continue to assist in the recovery of small businesses from the impact of COVID-19 and to franchise her company. Please join me welcoming our guest, Miss Selena Thomas.
Hi, so nice to see you, Dr. Ben.
Same here. The last time I talked to you was almost a month and a half ago when I was in Los Angeles.
Yes.
Thank you very much for giving us time in your busiest schedule. I know you're traveling for personal and business matters, and right now you're in Washington, and I appreciate your time.
Absolutely.
So as I announced already, this is one of the episodes of a podcast called HR Talk, Unpacking Trends and Talent Innovations. And given your expertise working with the small businesses, we selected this podcast title as HR Compliance and Infrastructure, Building a Strong HR Foundation for Small Businesses. So
Wow.
before anything, how do you get to the HR business? How do you start your field?
That's so funny that you say that. And, I think as we've all evolved professionally and personally, we find things that feed our personality, suits us best. And I had worked for a small business and there was no infrastructure and it was a mess. Ultimately, the company folded and there were things that were ultimately impactful to the employees, which was me at that time. And I was a social worker and I felt very compelled to switch genres, if you will, to still serve people, not in the capacity of social work because it was daunting to my spirit, and so I still wanted to find a way to help people. So it's humans first in HR, right?
Yeah.
And so I got a master's in HR, and then I got my PHR, became nationally certified, and then I got my SHRM CP, and so now I have clients all over the country, all over the world. I'm actually headed to the Olympic Games in a couple weeks. I have a client in Bordeaux. Yes, and so HR, not just connecting to people, but it connects you to the world, and it just really suited me. And I built a great book of business with many people in many different industries, and so iron sharpens iron, as you know, and you become a better practitioner when you're in multiple industries. Serving as a practitioner, that's what's really evolved me at 6 degrees, especially because we know the premise of 6 degrees is that we're all connected, and that's globally. Yes. And it was just so really serendipitous, but very organic as to how it happened. And now, owning my own company, 6 Degrees HR Consulting, I am permitted to serve people at many different capacities, from HR consulting with the handbooks and the processes to investigations and trainings. And so I just, the heels of a workplace investigation, same company, I had done a sexual harassment training 9 months before. Yes. So we know the standards. So it really allows me to kind of branch into many different elements of HR, but that's really how it started.
Very great. Good for you. Very inspiring. I can tell you from the brief interaction that we had in Los Angeles, I was so impressed by professionalism and attention to details and bringing some stuff to the table that I even was thinking about. So having the extra ear and eye was very impressive. Good for you.
Thank you so much.
Welcome. Tell us, what are some common legal challenges that the small businesses are facing in terms of HR compliances and infrastructure?
I think the most common is the lack thereof, the lack of infrastructure. As I mentioned early in the show, companies fold because they don't have that infrastructure. And as much as people, the employees, or even some of the administration resist that, that's where your biggest exposure is in your infrastructure. And if you don't have it, anyone that has an interest in your processes and what you're doing, they will focus there. And so the exposure is failing to have processes, failing to have policies and protocols that you follow, right? I don't do things in name only. So when people ask me to engage with them, as you know, with mutual clients that we have, I'm going to engage.
Yes.
Otherwise, I can't serve in the manner that my license requires me and my personal ethics
Correct.
upholds. And so when you have a practitioner that's like that, I'm focused when I start with a new client on what's missing. And because I'm also keenly aware of those that regulate you, what they're going to look for.
Yes.
And they're going to look for what's missing. They're going to look for your handbook. Most subpoenas that I get, the first thing they ask me for is the employee's file and the handbook and the time records.
Yes.
The proof is in your processes.
Yes.
And so you see the color come out of people's faces when they get those subpoenas and they don't have them,
Yes.
right? Because you can't make up records. And so now you know that you're flapping in the wind. You're a king with no robe, with no policy.
Do you want to earn CPE credit? Take this course of MyCPE 1 to earn free credit. Click the link in the description to get started.
You know, a lot of people say, there is no problem. We have no problem. I said, correct. You don't have problem until you have. And when the problem comes, then you're stuck in the mud.
It's big.
Yeah.
It's big. And it makes the difference, as we discussed earlier, and I say this often, it makes a difference between someone's existence or not, or a big check or not, or you having to really, company startups are really, people put the cart before the horse, if you will. And when they have a problem, they realize the cart's ahead of the horse. And they're like, oh my God, that's when they call me.
Yeah.
And or they hear that someone's done that and then they call me because they don't want to be that person. And so I'm also, if you follow me at any amount of time, I'm very big on networking and connecting. The premise of 6 Degrees
Yes.
is we're connected. So I'm very big on networking and connecting people. And because, that information is power. And so you could have someone within your wheelhouse that will make a difference for someone's business. And so I'm just one of those uh, um, networkers that make sure that people can connect those things.
Well, actually, this is so great because a lot of small business owners watch this podcast. Most of our clients and clients who are watching are small mom and pop or single person, very small 5 people crew, CPAs and HR professionals. What would you recommend as a professional you are for a small business to start to do? What practices you recommend them to do to get ahead of these compliances?
Absolutely. First, engage. You don't know what you don't know. That's what gets you. And so you need to engage someone who's designed to know that. So in my space, in my lane, human resources, I stay in my lane as a practitioner. That's key. You stay within your scope. So you find someone that is uh, a specialist in that particular field, and you start at the beginning. You don't wait until a crisis or a subpoena happens. When you're thinking of starting a business, or maybe you're just in that sweet spot where you're 5 to 8 people, get HR. Because more often than not, especially in the small mom and pop family owned companies, that is where the line is so blurred because they are family. Oh, that's just my mother-in-law. That's my son-in-law. That's my, right? No one has boundaries.
Yeah.
And those boundaries or lack thereof is what gets you in trouble because you're still a company that is held to all of the things that companies are held to, which is litigation, audit, compliance. And so things are good until they're not. And I tell people this all the time because they're always so surprised that this was my son-in-law. He's suing us. I'm like, yeah, he's an employee.
The reality, yeah.
In this moment, he's an employee that has the right to sue you for wage and hour because he wasn't being paid overtime. He wasn't being paid or classified properly. And you maybe took advantage that he was your son-in-law and didn't consider that labor law still applies in this situation.
I see it every day.
Every day it happens. And so I encourage people that are especially family owned, put someone that's neutral between you and those tough conversations. I am that long spoon between a business owner and those conversations or the relative relationship. You're hearing it from a neutral third party. have a dog in the fight, right? I'm not a relative that is, I'm best practice. And so more often than not, as you're growing, your employees will appreciate that you've done that, because that speaks that you're sound as a company, that you've invested enough in the employees to engage a third party that is going to be neutral. And you do want to have someone that is unbiased to the family dynamic.
That's very important. So if you list top 3 or 4 things that you recommend to any small business, that either if they have, they put it in order, or if they don't have, start doing. The top 3 or 4, let's say, coaching,
Handbook,
employment handbook.
employment handbook. That's the Bible of your company.
Correct.
And that is, again, the first thing that someone will subpoena, because those entities that regulate you will derive from that book as to the company's structure.
It's like a bylaw of the company. Yeah.
It's the Bible. If people use that analogy, they realize the value of a Bible to people, and they recognize that it has it all there.
Yeah.
And so that's what an entity is looking for. What did the employee know? And that's what we're going to draw from in making any conclusion about you as a company. So it's the framework. It's the important document between you and the employee in an effort to create the relationship. You have to then have an onboarding process, an offer letter, a full employee file. All of the things that are in that offer letter and employee file are legal documents. The second part that's subpoenaed is the employee's file. So you want to make sure that you have a very robust offer letter, speaks to the classification, the rate of pay, salary or hourly. Do I have insurance? What are my hours? What is my position? These are all nuances that the employee, when they're coming in, they know who they are to the company, what the expectations are, who they report to, and what is their job. Framework that anyone would want to have in a relationship, right? Because now you understand me and I understand you. Without that, absent of that, you have a little open-ended relationship. And I don't like open relationships, right? Most people don't. And so that's really, if you think of it in that context, you're going to be very clear and specific. And employees, even if they're resistant, even if they're rogue, they like structure. It's like children. They like structure. I don't want to go to bed at 8 o'clock, mommy, but they're glad they got the rest. They're better served for the structure.
Very good.
That's really all of it encompassed makes top 3. Top 3 is that you have a person that drives that, that is a specialist in that is going to be available to you from the beginning, middle to end of the relationship.
Do you recommend small businesses train somebody in their office to be an HR, or do you recommend that they have a much more professional person outside?
Outsource it. Someone internal is ultimately going to do this. Google guess it.
Like I do, yes.
And so, it goes back to you don't know what you don't know. So the knee-jerk response when someone doesn't know something is to Google it. And then more often than not, you're Googling it way out of context.
Context, yeah.
Right? And so that guessing part is what comes in. Like, I think this applies because I Googled it. Well, I've had many, many employer use that as a fallback in a labor claim or in some sort of action against them. And of course, that is not a legal defense. And so
No.
you want to make sure you have someone. Outsource it. Give it to the specialist. It's like you wouldn't do your own taxes. Give it to a tax professional. It's no different. You would not do or try to train on the job HR. There's real nuance to that when it comes to signature. For me, as a practitioner, I get to know the company, I get to know the owners, I get to know the backstory, I get to know all of the history in order to provide some real strategy. I'm also a strategic partner with companies, and so you want to outsource that.
Very great. So what do you recommend to business owners about what way to go to create the compliances between local, state, and federal? Because I'm not a professional HR person, so I
And
can't
add
get
another
into
one
it.
to that. Add another one to that. Add industry.
Oh,
There could be
industry.
some industry specific things that doesn't matter where you are, it's industry specific. If you speaking of medical versus construction, you have OSHA in construction, you have HIPAA and all those things in medical. So you add another
So
on
there is
top
a
of it.
local, industry, state, and federal
And
that
federal.
somebody has to know.
Yes.
And
It's
what do
what
you
you
recommend to somebody like me, a small business that have no idea?
well, the thing is, it is important to know the industry you're in. You'll know you're as a strategic partner, you're educating me on what you do. I'll give you an example. I have an amazing client, Eidetic Optical Systems, and it sounds like glasses, right? But
Yeah.
actually, they're lenses. They make very high-end lenses for satellites for many countries.
Wow.
And the science behind that obviously is proprietary to them, which is why they can translate to many industries in terms of contracts and procurement contracts to make lenses for satellites, for things that I'd have to sign an NDA to disclose, right? And so there are things that are within that contract that they're required to do that no federal, no state or municipal would have a say about. But
Any
but
indication?
this government that's contracting you says the following clearances have to be done on every single employee. Access, all these agreements that you're signing to some degree are tapered down, and each employee must sign it because there's so many details when it comes to procurement that so you have to partner with someone.
Yes.
And in those contracts that they have exclusions and they have expectations. And one of them specifically is that you have a certified professional that is managing your HR. Because we gave you this $1 billion contract, we have an interest in your processes. We want to make sure that any
you can't
exposure,
use just Google on that contract.
you have to have a partner. You have to have someone that is
This is
managing
exactly what you said. They don't know what they don't know. I have no idea how deep the different industry indicating and have an impact on the job.
Access latest and trending CPE courses with my CPE One Unlimited Access subscription. Subscribe now.
Absolutely. And here's another thing, and I'm really excited that we're talking in this time frame. As I mentioned to you, I'm headed to Paris for the Olympics. The client that I have, they got the bid on that contract with the Olympics as the champagne vendor for an Olympic team 4 years ago. 4 years ago. And now here we are. Paris is here in 2 weeks.
Yes.
Los Angeles, 2028. Right now, procurement contracts to support the Olympic Games being in Los Angeles are being delved out. And guess who has an interest in who gets those contracts? Me.
Yes.
Because
Good for
they
you.
have an interest that you're doing things right. So it doesn't matter that I get the contract. I need to support the vendor that does because I know you're held to a certain standard because that's a lot of money. $500 billion is going through Los Angeles to support the Olympic Games, from infrastructure, security, everything that you can think of, and just look in 2 weeks what that looks like, what the logistics of putting on the world being hosted in your city. I only care about who got the contract. So I'm saying this to say this is another way small businesses that listen to you and watch your show scale, because they can either get a piece of that contract and they have to have someone like me that helps them understand that your employee relationships and infrastructure when it relates to employees is paramount. It is the difference between you getting that contract or not.
Wow.
So it gets really big for me.
It gets much bigger. Good for you. Good for you.
Yeah.
I have some question about local businesses.
Sure.
How do you typically start your relationship with a new client, a new local business? What are the initial steps you take to access their HR needs?
Sure. And I think I mentioned I am huge on networking. I am currently the 2024 chairwoman for Valley Industry Association. We are a business organization that advocates, educates small businesses. And
Yes.
so we have a lot of initiatives in supporting small businesses. And so as the chairwoman, uh, and this is after being a member for 10 plus years, right? I grew my business and I eventually evolved into becoming a board member. And then now I'm as the leader of this organization, really responsible for making sure that we're connecting businesses, to resources, to education, to programming that really enriches and educates them on just the finer details, from having a business coach, connecting you to resources that provide grants if that's applicable in your lane, because we have nonprofits that join us. So these are all things that, and then keeping centered with community. We have businesses that, like mine, grew in our community. So our obligation is to pay forward what we've been able to accomplish. And that is really important to me as not just an individual, but a business owner, because you, by default, become leadership in your community. I've sustained jobs, I've maintained a real presence in our community supporting businesses. So it's very important to me to pay that forward. And so that is really a pillar of Valley Industry Association. So how do I do it? I engage in networking, I engage with organizations. Join your local chamber, join organizations that connect businesses to businesses, and then also stay in tune in your local community to the leadership, because your community, no matter where you are, if you're in Idaho right now, or like I'm in Spokane, Washington right now, there's commerce happening everywhere. The leadership in that community supports that commerce. So you want to get connected with your leadership. And if that's going to city council meetings, if that's connecting to the chamber, who's is typically in most communities, they have a chamber of commerce. And so I think all of the things that allow you to still conduct business but connect to the community will only make you bigger, will only make your presence known, and will only enrich you to opportunities.
Very great. Very great. How do you ensure that the solutions you're offering and providing are both effective and sustainable?
Sure.
It is
Such a great question. And so as a practitioner, so let me explain. We are required to maintain 80 hours of continuing education just in our scope of practice. Because as you know, the mandate annually, annually. And because of the mandate change, every year you just have to watch the headlines. January 1, this new law is passed for employees.
A lot of work every year, 80 hours.
Constant, 80 hours. But here's the rub about that. As a practitioner, you get credit for being in practice. So there's some CEUs just by being an active practitioner, which you prove in all of your trainings that you're taking. You're taking CEUs online or in person, and you get to turn those things in. But as a practitioner, I write policies, so I get credit for any written policies. I just completed the workplace violence prevention plan for many of my clients because it's a mandate that happened in California that was law by July 1. So how I stay up on it is my license requires that I stay up on it, and proof of that is in all of those things that I just shared with you, from CEUs to developing processes, interpreting legislation and turning it into policy. We get credit for that as practitioners. So it becomes sustainable because when you're implementing it, right? I just implemented a workplace violence prevention plan for a client last week. It's live now. It is an actual training that was completed. And now the employer, I passed the baton, right? This is your new process. If something should occur, you must do the following. You must have annual drills. You must document those drills. That's a live living document. It's sustainable. Now the power is in the people because they've been trained by the practitioner.
Are you having internal person? Are you assigning, for example, internal person that you always in communication with? in regard of HR compliances, or you just directly working with owners?
I'm glad that you asked that. So when we start service with clients, we always ask, who's your operations? Who do you want to take point on the communication?
Yes.
And if that's so, for one client that I have, I'll see them on Wednesday. They have directors of departments. So those four various directors at any time could be in touch with me. I just spoke to one of them today about a workplace picnic that we're going to have, making sure that everyone is wearing appropriate attire, even down to let's create a memo of the do's and don'ts, just to be clear of what our expectations are. So that director knows that she can reach out to me directly. So when we start service, we always talk about that. What does it look like? Now, in addition to that, a memo is given to all employees. 6 Degrees HR Consulting is taking point on all HR related matters. So you are also accessible as the employee of this company to the HR representative. And so they have that neutral party direct line of communication. Some employers assign me an internal email. So I'll get the HR email at dot dot dot, or they can call my line directly. It's really the preference of the client. And then in terms of owners, they range. Some owners I've met and I have a long-standing relationship. It's become very fluid and we're always engaged. Some owners, I've never met them, and they have people layers between them. They just trust that the company is engaged the correct vendor for this area. They don't even know anything else. And this is typically when they own multiple companies, and the bandwidth that they have is very limited to have direct communication like that.
Yeah, it do, as you said, depend to the size of the company also.
The size of the company.
Very great.
Yeah.
Now,
And the preference.
yes, I noticed something in your bio about your work during COVID-19. That was the era.
Yes.
How you said in your bio, assist in the recovery of the small businesses from impact of COVID-19. How has
Yes.
the HR changed post-COVID, especially for small businesses?
It's so impactful, and a lot of people don't recognize it because you hear this other term called workforce issues. So how it was impactful was that people learned how to do this, how to work remotely, just what we're doing right now. And guess what they decided? They don't want to go back to be in person. So the workforce issues became the recovery. How do we get people back in person? How do we compromise and go, okay, let's create a hybrid schedule. Let's create, and from that spawned many types of policies that had to be implemented. I had to develop policies for what it's like to work at home, a whole handbook of policies that you're on camera, that you're clocking in biometrically, that you are on camera and dressed appropriately, even down to you're in a room that is dedicated specifically with firewalls to the company. So how that kind of created another arm of the company of 6 Degrees was many companies said, listen, we can't get our workforce to come back. We're fully operational. We want to draw the line in the sand. And I'm saying, you might want to do that, but the workforce is saying otherwise. So you will have to compromise.
Yes.
How far that compromise goes will be predicated on the outcomes, meaning people will find jobs remote. They will leave a company. And
Yes.
that's the power dynamic that's currently happening in our country.
This
That's
is the
not
trend these days. We see it every day.
So you need to have a practitioner that is not just frontline of that, but understanding how to address it in compromise. And so bringing people back to the middle and saying, listen, we'll do 3 days in person, 2 days hybrid, but if there is a mandatory meeting, you must be there. So all of our offer letters actually changed. And we had sections of the offer letter that said, on the 3 days that you're in person, this is who you're reporting to. 2 days on offsite, this is what you're required to do. So we've had to respond to what the workforce is willing to do right now. And we've been innovative. We've answered the call for many of our current clients, but also clients that said, we heard that you're taking point on this. We need help. And so I've been really, really excited and proud of being able to be a part of that that innovative change in the mindset. So yeah, it's important.
You answered this question between the lines. The question I have is, what are some effective strategies you have seen for a small business recovering from the pandemic? Can you speak on that, please?
So effective strategies is really being honest about the landscape that we're all working within. Having those tough conversations with owners where we're really obligated to say, as much as you think the grass is greener, it's just as dry over there as it is on this side. And so being strategic about knowing and meeting them where they're at. I realize that you're this far away from the idea that you would have hybrid, but you might find a more efficient workforce. And a more efficient workforce is a happy workforce. So my master's is on why did people leave companies? And this was written in 2008. And it's still true to this day. People do not leave companies because of money. They leave because of how they feel about the work, how they feel in relation to that work, and if they're valued. And
Right.
so it's very important that you have someone that can help an employer, doesn't matter the industry, recognize that. And that there's missed opportunities if they don't. And you can get on a hamster wheel if you like, but what happens is that the workforce will find its way to what serves them. You and I, at the top of this conversation, talked about what led me to this industry. What led me to this industry, as I shared with you, is finding something that I was better suited for, that I could respond to and have passion and purpose about. And I am no different than the workforce. And so having those conversations with employers and understanding that if they're people centered first, they can accomplish anything. And that buy in has to happen from the top. If it doesn't, then what resonates is ultimately fed throughout the culture of the company. So if you pay attention to shows like Undercover Boss, which I've had a chance to consult with, it's always centered around the people and how they feel. So if you want to be a fly on the wall and allow someone to come in and do a survey or go in disguise and hear how people feel about you and the company culture, you can do that. Or you can start with speaking to someone that is an expert in that industry wise.
Yes.
And start to work back that way.
Yeah, we see this in organization development, coaching, and training a lot. When we do one-on-one interviews, we can see the key factor that keeping people there is their relationship with their organization and their manager. And they
Yeah.
always leave because of their manager or supervisor, not because of the work.
And I have to say this, I think we're also in a climate now, and this has been a trend that I've seen in the last 5 years, but it's also aside from how they feel about the work, how the company makes them feel, it's also their give back in the community. I have a lot of Gen X interviewees that will ask, what is the company's give back? What are your initiatives that we can also be proud of and be a part of? And so people really need to focus on those opportunities as well. As I mentioned, 6 Degrees is we're responsible because we've been so successful in our community to pay that forward. People like to work for companies that pay things forward, not just to their employees, but to their community. So it's an added layer, an added opportunity that employers should take a look at. And it enriches you as a company. Could you imagine just having an arm of your company, even small, even though we're small, we can give back big, even if it's our presence. I have a painting company that literally once a year will find a person in the community that's nominated. They will paint their house as an entire team. We go one day and we paint their house, and it is a huge pay it forward event.
Very
And
nice.
from that event, it spread into the community. People wanted to know what they could give for the pay it forward event.
People talk. People talk.
6 Degrees, we're all connected.
Yes.
And so the pay it forward concept, in one of my clients spread to an entire community. And when other companies, small as they may be, wanted to give one part, it's true the statement of the power of one. And that could be in an individual or the power of one company. But it all is always, no matter where you are when you're watching this, you're in a community. And so as a part of being part of that community and driving commerce and driving the opportunity to employ people and the community's revenue, you want to give that back in a way that not just resonates but helps your community. And I think as being part of the organization, the Valley Industry Association, all of our members are thoughtful in that way and always want to know, in speaking to me as the chairwoman, what can I do more? What can I give back?
That's very nice.
What are we doing as an organization? And so I'm really, really proud of that.
Very exciting. Very
Yeah.
respectful. Good for you and the organization. We're going to ask you some question about future focus. How do you see the role of HR in a small business evolving in the coming years?
Sure. Well, I think people are more engaged with the fact that they have to do things right, especially when it comes to their employees, because they'll fail if they don't. It's everything in a company needs to be centered around the employees first. When you're people centered, the organization thrives. And so, in the coming years, that being undeniable for your sustainability, I think people have a different concept about what partnering with HR means. And it means just that. It means that you're partnering. It means that you are leaning on your practitioners to be a strategic partner to not just the day-to-day operations, but the long game. The real future of the company is always in succession, and succession is in your people. And so the future of HR is bright. It's big. It takes me all over the world. And so if I've done job fairs or spoken to high school students about the concept of HR, and they never could conceptualize that HR could have the different arms from trainings to creating initiatives to having team building and developing that. So companies are also developing those people centered positions where they just are dedicated to the culture of the company. I just went to, and I'll have to send you this picture and you can put it in the show, feel free. I just went to, on Friday, a team building event at Dodger Stadium where we did like a Top Golf style 9 holes throughout the stadium. And it was a payroll company that I partner with that said, this is what we do to help not just appreciate our power partners, but our clients and our employees. And this is just one kind of idea and concept to bring people together, have fun at the same time, and do good business. It was brilliant and a lot of fun.
Very exciting. Very exciting. What trends do you anticipate will have the biggest impact on HR compliances and infrastructure in the future?
Sure. The remote worker is always going to be not necessarily the challenge, but certainly it's always evolving. It is delving. There's a lot of, and I'm just kind of getting into the weeds a little bit, but I think it's important. It sets a lot of precedence for what you can and cannot do and say with employees that are essentially in their home / workplace. And so there's a lot of cases in the pipeline right now about privacy and about expectations and an employer's right to know certain things because it's uncharted territory. So when you have anything that's new, and it's a new genre for all of us, to
Yes.
the remote worker, even though COVID has come and somewhat passed, the impact of it and the litigation that's come out of that era is still happening now. It's actually catching up now.
Yeah,
Litigation took years.
one of the trends related to this conversation, not from HR point of view, but from business point of view, is a lot of empty real estate now is available at the offices
Absolutely.
in big metropolitan cities. And now the cities and the state getting smart about turning them to an apartment building.
Absolutely.
They're not going to come back. That many.
They're not coming back.
They're not going to come back to work the way it used to be.
As you can see, the trickle-down effect is not just affecting the employer, but the commerce that the employer used to operate out of. And so that particular commerce needs to become innovative about how they sustain, right? Because the employers figured it out, like, hey, this is actually more cost efficient for us to allow for you to work from home, or we can downsize in a way that doesn't require, this level of building that we have. So it has been impactful. And I say, there's this advent of AI, right? And everyone's like, oh, it's going to take our jobs. I'm like, there's HR is going nowhere because you still, the human is first in HR, and if people remember that,
resources.
so you need humans for that.
You mentioned AI. I have a question regarding AI.
Sure.
As the world of business, especially with the emergence of AI, how do you stay updated with the latest changes in HR laws and regulations?
Sure. And so right now, there aren't any laws in terms of what an employer. AI is kind of like the wild, wild west right now.
Yes,
it's really uncharted territory. There aren't regulations that, unless you're in a federal situation, obviously copyright, schools, institutions are even leaning into it because it's not going anywhere. It's evolving in such a way every day that there's no way to contain something that evolves at such a speed. So what you can do is lean into it, have protocols about it, and transparency. That's where our policies are very detailed and robust about disclosure that AI was used. Because now you want to give credit to the technology. Very, very important. Because we don't want employees to lean on things because now we have a different idea of their capabilities, right? If AI has done the work for you, we want to make sure that you're giving credit to the technology in combination with what you've generated from the AI. So our policies are more about transparency, disclosures, when and if it can be used at all. There's methods now that allow you to kind of share credit as you can generate something and say, this is the framework that I asked AI to enhance a document for me. And so now that tool becomes more collaborative than the one that completed it. Does that make sense?
Yes.
And so this is what our companies are doing is asking of me to create policies that are designed to support the employee and the employer in developing anything. So in reverse, the employer needs to also disclose this is AI generated and this is AI supported, whatever is appropriate.
Yeah, it become an issue now in academia also. I'm involved with academia and classes, and it become really something that universities, colleges scratching their head in what is the degree we can allow students to use it.
Correct.
And where is the gray area? Where is the black and white? And
absolutely,
students that got fired get expelled from the courses. Yeah.
So as I mentioned to you at the top of our show, I'm here at Gonzaga. My daughter is at her freshman orientation, and on the outline of what her day looks like, they speak to just one subject line of being AI and what our policies are. And so that tells me, having not read the policy, that they have structure for the use of AI at this university, and that they want to be clear about that. And that they want the students to be educated on it before they begin so that they're clear, because you're coming from a high school level to a high academia institution. They want to make sure that they've been able to teach you how to continue to be academic.
Absolutely. Mm-hmm. Selena, what advice would you give to other HR professionals?
Just in general, or to start?
In general. Actually, my question have two sides. What is your advice to other HR professionals in their profession? And what advice would you give to small businesses on how to succeed in the future?
Sure. So part one, my advice to HR professionals is to constantly learn. Constantly. I'm grateful for the book of business that I developed because, as I mentioned, it's several different industries. So I think if you're putting yourself in several different industries, you're allowing yourself to really evolve as a practitioner, because it's not all cookie cutter. It has to be restructured for the industry, for the company, for the culture. And so all that does is enhance you as a practitioner serving other people. And so I say, as much as you can, not just continue to get CEUs, but extend yourself into multiple industries. If you have an opportunity to do so, it really enhances you as a practitioner if you're working and dedicated to one specific type of company or industry. Learn from many industries.
Very good. And for business owners, what is your advice for the future, for the work in the future?
My advice is that this world continues to change, and that if you don't change with it, you're left behind. That's no matter what you do. Doesn't matter the industry, right? If I didn't evolve as a practitioner, I would have been left behind, especially with COVID, right? I made myself essential. For my advice for small businesses is to continue to evolve. I have companies that, because of COVID, had to develop other arms of their company. So as I mentioned to you, that painting company that pays forward every year, during COVID, they were not essential. So they learned and developed a division that disinfects buildings, because at that time, everything had to be disinfected to come back to work. And so they developed another arm of their company by default to exist. And so if you do that outside of a crisis, because that was in response to the crisis, you'll always continue to grow. And so whatever the company it is, find a way to evolve and have multiple streams and types of services. If you don't paint yourself into a corner, no pun intended, but
Yes.
it's essentially that company did not paint themselves into a corner. Now they do concrete coating, they're full blast on their painting, interior, exterior. They get procurement contracts, they do disinfecting. They learned how to not just respond to the crisis, but to say, if a crisis comes, we're essential. We're essential as a company. For me, I am a small business. I had to make myself essential. So if you're thinking of growing, and you don't want to always think that there's this big tsunami coming, but you always want to sustain jobs, create jobs. So no matter what, you're going to have to think in an evolutionary way. And I think when you do that, you will be sustainable and, again, have an impact on your community. You're going to, by default, become community leaders because you've created jobs and sustained jobs. It's such a great opportunity when you are a business owner to leave a legacy. And so consider that.
Very great. Selena, last question. How people can find you and your using your services?
Absolutely, and thank you for asking and having me on your show. You've always been so gracious to me.
Cool.
As I said, I work nationally and internationally. I am based out of Santa Clarita, California. My website is 6degrees, the number 6degrees, hrconsulting.com. I'm also very big in the social media space, and so I have websites that my social media content that I can, handles that I can give to you, and you can post on your show. But you can also Google 6 degrees. There's a lot of people Google things. We talked about that. And you can also Google Selena Thomas, Selina Thomas.
Excellent.
So you can always find me because I'm on social media every day. This will be on social media today.
Yes, yes. Thank you very much, Selena. I love your personality. I love your character, solid character, because I've worked with you briefly and I know what I can count. And
Thank
thank you for your time. I know you're spending time with your daughter in the state of Washington. Please pass my congratulations to your young lady.
Access latest and trending CPE courses with my CPE One Unlimited Access subscription. Subscribe now.